All right. We've seen a lot in the past couple of videos, talking about order of operations, the logical operators that are and, or, and not, the comparison operators. We've seen a lot about filters. And it can be overwhelming because there's a lot of knowledge in there that drills down deep into what filters are and how you can write them. But trust me, as you go along this journey, you are going to be a master at filtering. And so when we talked about the order of operations, what we were talking about is how is the database deciding how to execute the query, in what order? And then we talked about operator precedence. Well, as I alluded to you in that one exercise, where we use the parentheses to shorten the filter, SQL has a way of deciding how it is going to process that where clause. And certain operators have precedence over other operators. Precedence meaning they are applied before or after, depending on their priority. So, defining operator precedence, a statement having multiple operators, multiple ands and ors, is evaluated based on the priority of operators. So, what this means is that every operator we use, and, or, not, parentheses, all of them have a priority. What is that priority? Well, at a high level, from top to bottom, we're going from most important to least important. The most important is the parentheses. These will always take precedence over the rest. They are the most important. And then we go into multiplication and division. If you do multiplication and division in the where clause, this will take precedence over anything below it. Same for subtraction and addition. That takes precedence over anything below it, but everything above it takes precedence over it. So this already looks like math class. Multiplication and division take precedence over subtraction and addition. But then we get into our logical operators, our Boolean logic. And then we can see here that, well, not has precedence over and has precedence over or, meaning that or is the least important operator. And that and not take precedence over it. They will be executed first over the or statement, right? And if we add parentheses, well, that takes precedence over everything because it is the most important. And so now you may be asking yourself, okay, Mo, well, I get it. If you use parentheses, it's more important than multiplication and division and so on and so forth. But what if I'm just using multiple operators in a row? What happens there? And they have equal importance. Well, if the operators have equal precedence, for instance, you're using multiple ands or multiple ors or multiple nots, then the operators will be evaluated directionally from left to right or right to left. I can hear you saying, huh? What do you mean from left to right or right to left? Well, okay, we just discussed that each of these operators has a priority. So they will be executed in that priority. But now we're saying, okay, well, what if I use multiple ands, multiple ors, multiple nots? What's going to happen then? Then they get evaluated directionally? What determines the direction? What determines if it's from left to right or right to left? Good question. Here is a snippet from the Postgres docs. And don't focus too much on all of it, but they have this associativity column. And what that says is it going to go from left to right or right to left? And which ones have which associativity? So if we look here at the bottom, we can see not, and or. And we can see that and has left associativity and or has left associativity. And not goes from right to left. Interesting. Okay. So, the operator precedence, when we're talking about using multiple of the same, goes from right to left for not and left to right for and or. meaning that when you use a not statement, it's going to look to the right side of it and negate it. And when you use an and statement, it's going to chain the previous one to the next one in order to say this and this and this and this. And the or does the same thing. It goes and looks to the left. It's this or this or this. So when you chain them, they're looking to their left, except not will be looking to its right. So an example of this would be, well, if we select state and gender from customers, where the gender is female and the state is Oregon, or the state is New York. Mo, what's happening here? Well, we looked at this, right? This was the original exercise. And if you look at the where clause, it doesn't work. This is the broken where clause. Because what we're saying here is get me state and gender where you are a female from Oregon or you are from New York. So, interesting. When we read queries, we want to be very, very precise in what the outcome is going to be. And so I phrased it in this sentence so that you can clearly see why it is broken. We are saying here, get me state and gender where you are a female from Oregon or you are from New York. We can clearly see that the female filter did not apply to the people from New York because it goes and state Oregon or state New York. So here we're looking at a priority sequence. Or gets executed last, and the and has been chained to the filter of state Oregon. So these will execute together, and this will execute separately. And so the gender female only applies to the people from Oregon. So you may be asking yourself, well, what was the correct answer again? Well, if we select state and gender from customers and we say where gender is female and the state is Oregon, or the gender is female and the state is New York, well, now what we're saying is get me state and gender where you are a female from Oregon or a female from New York. Okay, that makes sense. We're clearly distinguishing the difference in the filter. And now we can get into the parentheses case. This is the shorthand that I showed you during the exercise that may have tripped you up. Because parentheses, what do these do? Right, well, let's dig deeper into it. If we said select state and gender from customers, where the gender is female and parentheses, state is equal to Oregon or state is equal to New York, we can now say, okay, well, SQL is going to apply the parentheses first. So it's going to filter this first. It's going to check, are you from Oregon or are you from New York? And then it's going to do the and it's going to check if you are female. So because of the parentheses, the chain ends up being different. Here we're saying, get me state and gender where you are a female and you are from Oregon or New York. And so now I can hear you thinking, well, those two queries, they did the exact same thing. Yes, they did. But when we want to explain our query as a phrase, we want to explain it in a way that reflects the way it was written, even though the results are the same. They are written differently. Here we can see that we are saying where the gender is female and then we use the parentheses to create importance. So that's why we write it differently. All right. So I can hear you thinking, okay, Mo, I get it. I get why you did it during that exercise and I get why it simplifies things. But could you show me how the priority chaining works and how the right to left, left to right works? Yes, we're going to get into that. We're going to dive deeper into that. I have a bunch of examples that I can show you on how SQL is going to decide if it's going to do a priority or a right to left, left to right. So let's get into those.